The massive ships appeared without warning on a Tuesday morning, blotting out the sun over every major city on Earth. They hung there like dark metal storms, silent and menacing, casting shadows that stretched for miles. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her laboratory at the Global Defense Institute when the first reports came flooding in. 12 vessels confirmed, her assistant Marcus stammered, his face pale as he read from multiple screens. Each one is roughly the size of Manhattan. They're positioned over New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, and 7 other major population centers. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the laboratory floor. 20 years of studying theoretical alien contact protocols, and now it was actually happening. The emergency broadcasts began within minutes, filling every screen and speaker across the planet with the same terrifying message. The voice that emerged from the ships was deep, resonating with an authority that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. It spoke in perfect English, then repeated the same message in dozens of languages, ensuring every human on Earth would understand. Inferior species of the third planet. The voice boomed across every communication device simultaneously. I am Zarkoth the Eternal, supreme ruler of the hegemony of worlds. Your primitive civilization has been deemed unworthy of continued existence. You have polluted this world, waged endless wars among yourselves, and proven incapable of true advancement. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the alien proclamation. Around her, the laboratory had fallen completely silent except for the mechanical hum of equipment that seemed suddenly meaningless. Your species will be terminated within 7 of your rotations, Zarkoth continued, his words carrying the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. Those among you who prove useful as laborers may be preserved for servitude. The rest will be eliminated to make room for superior beings who will properly utilize this world's resources. The transmission cut off, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to press down on the entire planet. Then came the demonstrations of power. Massive energy beams lanced down from each ship, targeting unpopulated areas but creating explosions that could be seen from space. Mountains were leveled, deserts turned to glass, and ocean water boiled away in perfect circles miles wide. Within hours, panic spread like wildfire. Governments convened emergency sessions, militaries mobilized, and millions of people fled from the major cities in terror. The highways became rivers of desperate humanity, all seeking safety that didn't exist anywhere on Earth. But Sarah wasn't running. She was thinking, her scientific mind already working on the problem even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. She'd spent her career studying alien technology, theoretical frameworks, energy signatures, and defensive possibilities. Now she had real data, and despite the overwhelming terror of the situation, she found herself fascinated by the readings her instruments were collecting. Marcus, are you getting this energy signature data? She called to her assistant, who was still staring at the news feeds in shock. What? Oh yes, the instruments are recording everything, he replied, shaking his head to clear it. But Sarah, what's the point? They're going to destroy us all in a week. Maybe, Sarah said, her eyes bright with the kind of dangerous thinking that had made her one of the world's leading xenotechnology theorists. But they made a mistake. They gave us a deadline instead of just wiping us out immediately. The next day brought more pronouncements from Zarkoth. His ship transmitted images of other worlds the hegemony had conquered, showing gleaming cities built on the bones of extinct civilizations. The alien rulers seemed to take pleasure in describing the fate of species that had resisted, painting vivid pictures of orbital bombardments and systematic extermination. Your militaries are as insects to us, Zarkoth declared during his second broadcast. Your weapons are primitive toys that cannot even scratch our hulls. Submit now, and perhaps 10% of your population will be allowed to live as our servants. The world's governments tried everything they could think of. Nuclear missiles were launched from submarines, only to be casually swatted aside by energy fields that surrounded the alien ships. Fighter jets that approached too closely simply vanished, disintegrated by weapons that left no trace of their existence. But Sarah noticed something the military strategists missed. The energy fields fluctuated. They had patterns, rhythms, moments of variation that suggested they weren't invulnerable barriers, but sophisticated technology that could be understood and potentially exploited. She called the Global Defense Institute's Emergency Council, speaking rapidly into the secure communication line. I need access to every piece of data we're collecting on these ships. Power signatures, electromagnetic readings, gravitational anomalies, everything. Dr. Chen, with respect, what can you possibly accomplish that our best military minds haven't already considered? General Hayes asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion and barely contained despair. Something they might not expect, Sarah replied, her mind already racing ahead to possibilities that seemed impossible, but weren't actually impossible. These aliens, this Zarkoth, he's making the same mistake every conqueror makes. He's underestimating his enemy. The truth was, humans had one advantage that Zarkoth hadn't considered. Humanity had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing each other. Every horrible weapon, every devastating tactic, every ruthless strategy had been developed by humans fighting other humans. The aliens saw primitive technology and assumed primitive thinking. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. As the third day dawned with the alien ships still hanging like swords over humanity's neck, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the energy signature data was a pattern that her theoretical models recognized. The alien ships weren't just advanced technology. They were following principles that human science had already begun to understand. "Marcus," she called excitedly, "contact the Institute's Quantum Physics Division and get me a direct line to the International Space Station. I think I know how we're going to fight back." The war for Earth's survival was about to begin, and humanity was about to show the galaxy why they'd survived every catastrophe their world had thrown at them for millions of years. The underground command center beneath Colorado's Cheyenne Mountain buzzed with frantic activity as representatives from every major nation gathered for humanity's first real council of war. Sarah Chen stood before a wall of screens displaying data that would have been science fiction just days ago, but now represented their only hope for survival. The energy signatures show a quantum resonance pattern, Sarah explained to the assembled generals, scientists, and world leaders. Their shields operate on principles we've been theorizing about for decades. They're not magic. They're just more advanced versions of technologies we already understand. President Martinez leaned forward in her chair, studying the complex readings with intense focus. "Dr. Chen, speak plainly. Can we hurt these things or not?" "We can," Sarah said with a confidence that surprised even herself. "But not with conventional weapons. We need to think differently. The aliens are using our own assumptions against us, assuming we'll keep trying the same failed approaches." General Petrov from Russia slammed his fist on the table. "My country launched everything we had at the ship over Moscow. ICBMs, hypersonic missiles, even experimental plasma weapons. Nothing worked. The energy field around their ship didn't even flicker. Because you were hitting them where they expected to be hit," Sarah replied, manipulating the holographic display to show the alien ship's energy patterns. "Look at this data from the International Space Station. Every time we attack, their shields focus on the point of impact. The energy redistributes, concentrates, becomes nearly impervious, but that means it has to come from somewhere else." Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Japan's Defense Ministry caught on first. "You're saying the shields have weak points when they're being attacked elsewhere?" "Exactly," Sarah smiled grimly. "We've been fighting these ships like they're fortresses, but they're not. They're sophisticated machines with limitations we can exploit. We just need to coordinate our attacks in ways they won't anticipate." The next 18 hours saw the most incredible mobilization in human history. Every remaining satellite was repositioned, every submarine surfaced to receive new orders, and every military base on Earth became part of a single, coordinated plan. But the real work was happening in laboratories and workshops around the world, where humanity's brightest minds worked frantically to weaponize theories that had never been tested. Meanwhile, Zarkoth continued his psychological warfare campaign. On the fourth day, his voice echoed across Earth with renewed arrogance. "Primitive creatures," he began, his tone amused rather than angry. "We have observed your pathetic attempts at resistance. Your missiles bounce off our hulls like pebbles thrown by children. Your aircraft vanish before they can even approach our vessels. Yet still you persist in this futile struggle." The transmission showed images from inside the alien ships, revealing beings that looked surprisingly similar to humans but taller. With elongated limbs and silver-tinted skin, they moved with fluid grace through corridors that seemed to flow like liquid metal, operating technology that appeared to respond to their thoughts rather than physical controls. "Behold the glory of the hegemony," Zarkoth continued, the cameras focusing on his imposing figure seated on what could only be described as a throne, carved from a single massive crystal. We have conquered 47 worlds. We have eliminated 63 species that proved inadequate. Your fate was decided before we even arrived, but this time, instead of the despair that had followed the previous broadcasts, something different stirred in humanity's collective heart. Anger, defiance, the peculiar human tendency to become more dangerous when backed into a corner. In Tokyo, Dr. Tanaka completed the first prototype of what they were calling the resonance disruptor, a device based on Sarah's quantum frequency analysis. In London, teams of engineers worked around the clock to modify existing particle accelerators into weapons that could generate the specific energy signatures needed to destabilize alien shield harmonics. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a graduate student in Mexico City, who had been studying the alien transmissions, noticed something the experts had missed. The aliens weren't just broadcasting in multiple languages, they were broadcasting on multiple quantum frequencies simultaneously. Their communication system was their greatest weakness. If they're using quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across their fleet, Maria explained via emergency video conference, then disrupting that network would blind them to coordinated attacks. Sarah felt a surge of excitement as the implications became clear. You're right. Their ships are operating as a single distributed intelligence. Take out their communication network, and they become 12 isolated targets instead of one coordinated fleet. The plan that emerged was audacious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. Using every communication satellite, radio telescope, and experimental quantum device on Earth, they would create a resonance cascade designed to overload the aliens' quantum communication network. Meanwhile, coordinated conventional attacks would force the ships to focus their shields in predictable patterns, creating windows of vulnerability. On the sixth day, as Zarkoth prepared to begin the systematic destruction of Earth's major cities, humanity struck back with a fury that caught the aliens completely off guard. The first wave began with every remaining nuclear submarine launching simultaneously, not at the alien ships but at carefully calculated points in Earth's oceans. The underwater detonations created massive, electromagnetic pulses that Sarah's team had, designed to interact with the quantum fields surrounding the alien vessels. As the ship's shields automatically adjusted to protect against the electromagnetic interference, teams of modified satellites began broadcasting the resonance cascade that Maria had discovered. The effect was immediate and devastating to the alien communication network. For the first time since their arrival, the alien ship's perfect coordination faltered. Zarkoth's ship, hovering over New York, began to drift slightly as its connection to the fleet was severed. The vessel over London actually wobbled in the air as its automatic system struggled to maintain stability without the network guidance. Then came the second wave. Particle accelerators repurposed as weapons fired synchronized beams at precise points on each ship's hull. These weren't designed to penetrate the shields but to create standing wave patterns that would resonate through the alien vessel's quantum structure. The results exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. The ship over Moscow suddenly listed to one side, its energy field flickering like a damaged light bulb. The vessel above Beijing actually began to descend toward the city before its pilots regained control. But it was the ship over Sydney that provided the most encouraging sign. As the resonance cascade reached its peak intensity, the alien vessel's shields collapsed entirely for nearly 3 seconds. In that brief window, conventional missiles launched from Australian naval vessels actually struck the ship's hull, creating visible damage and sending debris raining down into the harbor. The message was clear to both humans and aliens alike. The supposedly invincible hegemony could be hurt. Zarkoth's next transmission crackled with interference, his previously composed demeanor replaced by something approaching rage. "Impossible creatures," he snarled, his image distorted by the quantum static still disrupting his communication systems. "You dare to strike at the hegemony? You will pay for this insolence with more suffering than your primitive minds can comprehend." But Sarah noticed something in the alien ruler's voice that she hadn't heard before. Uncertainty. Fear. For the first time since arriving at Earth, Zarkoth wasn't entirely sure he would win. Humanity had drawn first blood and they were just getting started. The retaliation came at dawn on the 7th day, just as Zarkoth's original deadline expired. Instead of the systematic destruction he had promised, the alien response was chaotic and desperate. proving that humanity's attacks had rattled them more than their ruler wanted to admit. The ship over London struck first, sending a beam of concentrated energy that carved a perfectly straight line through an abandoned section of the city. But instead of the devastating display of power it was meant to be, the attack revealed something crucial. The beam flickered and wavered, lacking the surgical precision the aliens had demonstrated earlier. "They're still suffering from the communication disruption," Sarah observed from the emergency command center, watching the readings spike and fluctuate on her instruments. "Their coordination is completely broken." General Hayes studied the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. "Then we hit them again, harder this time." The second wave of human resistance launched within hours, but this time it wasn't just about disrupting alien technology. Humanity had learned from their brief success and adapted with the terrifying speed that had carried them from caves to space in just a few millennia. Dr. Tanaka's resonance disruptors, hastily manufactured in factories around the world, were now being deployed in coordinated arrays. Instead of single-point attacks, humanity created interference patterns that stretched across entire continents, turning Earth's atmosphere itself into a weapon against the quantum frequencies the aliens relied upon. The ship hovering over Moscow was the first to fall. It began with a slight vibration, barely visible to observers on the ground. Then the massive vessel started to rotate slowly, its perfectly stable hover becoming an uncontrolled drift. The alien ship's energy field began to pulse erratically, creating rainbow patterns in the sky as different frequencies fought for dominance. "All units, Moscow target is showing critical instability," came the report from Russian command. "Recommend immediate evacuation of the impact zone." The alien vessel tried to regain altitude, its engines flaring with desperate energy. For a moment it seemed like the ship might recover. Then Maria Santos's quantum cascade reached its peak intensity, and the communication interference that had been hampering the aliens became something much more destructive. The Moscow ship's quantum containment failed. Catastrophically, the explosion wasn't like anything in human experience. Instead of fire and debris, the alien vessel simply unraveled, its matter returning to component atoms in a brilliant flash that turned the Russian sky purple for nearly an hour. The energy release was so massive that electromagnetic equipment across Eastern Europe temporarily failed. But more importantly, the aliens had lost their first ship. Zarkoth's response was immediate and furious. The remaining 11 vessels abandoned their positions over major cities and began moving toward more defensible locations over the open ocean. The alien ruler's transmission, still crackling with interference, carried a tone of rage that human ears found deeply satisfying. "You think this victory means something, primitive creatures?" Zarkoth snarled, his perfect composure finally cracking. "You have destroyed one vessel and doomed your entire species. The hegemony does not suffer insults. We will return with the full might of our empire and scour this pathetic world clean of life." "That sounds like a retreat to me," President Martinez observed with cold satisfaction as she watched the alien ships repositioning themselves over the Pacific Ocean. "They're running from a bunch of primitives with toys," but Sarah wasn't celebrating yet. Her instruments were detecting massive energy buildups from the alien fleet as they established new positions. "They're not retreating," she warned. "They're preparing for something big. Energy readings are off the charts." The something big turned out to be a coordinated bombardment unlike anything the aliens had attempted before. From their positions scattered across the Pacific, the 11 remaining ships began firing synchronized energy beams at Earth's major population centers. But instead of the precise surgical strikes they had demonstrated earlier, these attacks were clumsy and unfocused. The beam aimed at Tokyo missed the city entirely, boiling away a section of the Pacific Ocean instead. The attack on New York carved a crater in the Atlantic seabed but left the city untouched. Only the strike targeting London came close to its intended target, and even that passed harmlessly through the upper atmosphere because the targeting systems were still malfunctioning. "They're shooting blind," General Petrov reported with amazement. "Without their communication network, they can't coordinate their attacks properly." Humanity seized the opportunity with the ruthless efficiency of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival. The third wave of attacks focused on the aliens' new weakness, their inability to coordinate defensive responses across the fleet. Every submarine in the world's navies launched simultaneously, filling the Pacific with nearly 1,000 nuclear missiles and torpedoes. The attacks weren't meant to destroy the alien ships directly, but to force them to activate their shields in overlapping patterns that would interfere with each other. The strategy worked perfectly. As the alien vessels' defensive systems tried to protect against the incoming missiles, their energy fields began to interact and destabilize. The ship that had been positioned over the Mariana Trench found its shields fluctuating wildly, as interference from neighboring vessels disrupted its defensive harmonics. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, a team of Australian and Japanese scientists had modified their country's most powerful radio telescopes into focused beam weapons. Using the quantum frequency data that Sarah's team had gathered, they created targeted interference patterns designed to overload alien shield generators. The results were spectacular. The ship hovering off the coast of Japan suddenly found itself caught between submarine-launched missiles from below and quantum interference from above. Its shields collapsed entirely for nearly 30 seconds, long enough for a coordinated strike from 3 different naval fleets to score direct hits on the vessel's hull. The alien ship didn't explode like the one over Moscow, but it was clearly damaged. Atmosphere vented from several breaches, creating visible streams of gas in the thin air around the vessel. The ship's perfect hovering stability became an erratic wobble as its systems fought to maintain altitude. Most significantly, the damaged vessel began broadcasting distress signals on frequencies that human equipment could intercept and decode. "They're calling for help," Maria Santos reported excitedly from her monitoring station in Mexico City. "The signals are going out toward deep space, but also toward the other ships in their fleet." Sarah felt a surge of anticipation as she realized what this meant. They're more vulnerable than they want us to believe, and they're scared enough to ask for reinforcements. The psychological impact of humanity's success rippled across Earth's remaining population. The aliens who had seemed invincible just days ago were now visibly damaged, retreating and calling for help. More importantly, they were making mistakes that revealed just how dependent they had become on technology they didn't fully understand. As night fell over the Pacific battlefield, Zarkoth's transmission carried a new tone. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded very much like desperation. "Creatures of Earth," he began, his image still distorted by quantum interference. "You have proven more resourceful than anticipated. The hegemony is prepared to offer terms. Surrender now, submit to our authority, and 60% of your population will be permitted to live as laborers in our empire." The offer was met with humanity's collective response, delivered by every government on Earth simultaneously. No. The word echoed across every communication frequency in dozens of languages, a simple rejection that carried the weight of humanity's decision to fight to the bitter end rather than accept slavery. Zarkoth's reaction was explosive. "Then you have chosen extinction. No species has ever defeated the hegemony. Your resistance ends now." But as the alien ruler raged and threatened, Sarah noticed something that made her smile for the first time in days. The energy readings from the alien fleet were becoming increasingly erratic and unstable. The ships that had seemed like unstoppable juggernauts were showing signs of serious system failures. Humanity had gone from helpless victims to dangerous opponents in less than a week. The question now was whether they could finish what they had started before Zarkoth's reinforcements arrived. The intelligence breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Commander Eva Rossi, an Italian naval officer stationed on a submarine in the Mediterranean, had been monitoring the alien distress signals when she noticed something that changed everything. "Dr. Chen, you need to hear this," she said. During an emergency video conference, her face flushed with excitement. "I've been running the alien communications through our linguistic analysis software, and I found something incredible. They're not just calling for help. They're arguing with each other." Sarah leaned forward, studying the decoded transmissions on her screen. The alien language was still largely incomprehensible, but the emotional undertones were unmistakable. Fear, anger, and most importantly, disagreement among the alien fleet commanders. "It gets better," Eva continued. 3 of the ships are calling for immediate retreat. 4 others want to continue fighting until reinforcements arrive, and at least 2 of them are questioning Zarkoth's leadership directly. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They're not unified anymore. The communication disruption didn't just break their tactical coordination, it shattered their command structure. This discovery led to humanity's most sophisticated strategy yet. Instead of simply attacking the alien ships, human forces began intercepting and manipulating their communications, turning the aliens' own words against them. Cryptographers who had spent their careers breaking enemy codes now worked frantically to decode alien language patterns and insert carefully crafted misinformation into their networks. Dr. Kim Sato, a linguistics professor from Seoul National University, proved particularly adept at understanding alien communication patterns. Working with Ava's intercepted signals, she managed to create what she called cognitive viruses. Messages that appeared to be legitimate alien communications, but actually contained contradictory orders and false intelligence. The results were immediately apparent. The alien ship positioned over the Indian Ocean suddenly began moving toward the Atlantic, apparently responding to orders that had never been given. Two other vessels started firing at empty patches of ocean, convinced by false intelligence that human submarines were lurking beneath their positions. Most significantly, the ship that had been damaged in the earlier battle received what appeared to be an order from Zarkoth to abandon its position and retreat to the fleet's staging area. The vessel's crew, already demoralized by their injuries, followed the fake command without question, leaving a gap in the alien defensive formation that human forces were quick to exploit. "This is working better than I dared hope," Sarah reported to the Global Command Council. "We're not just fighting their technology anymore. We're fighting their psychology, their social structure, their assumptions about how warfare works." General Hayes nodded approvingly as he studied the tactical displays. "They've been conquering primitive species for so long, they've forgotten how to fight an enemy that can adapt. They're thinking like an empire, not like warriors." The next phase of human resistance took advantage of this realization. Instead of massive, coordinated attacks that the aliens could recognize and respond to, humanity adopted guerrilla tactics on a global scale. Small groups of submarines launched single missiles at unpredictable intervals. Modified civilian aircraft carried resonance disruptors into the upper atmosphere before disappearing back into cloud cover. Even amateur radio operators joined the effort, broadcasting interference patterns that disrupted alien sensors. The psychological effect on the alien crews was devastating. Unable to predict where the next attack would come from, they began responding to false alarms and phantom threats. The ship over the South Atlantic fired its main weapon at a flock of migrating birds, convinced they were some new form of human aircraft. Another vessel nearly collided with one of its own fleet members while pursuing what turned out to be a weather balloon, carrying a simple radio transmitter. But it was Dr. Chen's discovery of the alien's greatest weakness that truly turned the tide of battle. While analyzing the energy signatures from the damaged alien vessel, she noticed something that made her heart race with excitement. "Marcus, look at this quantum resonance pattern," she called to her assistant, pointing at readings that seemed impossible. "The alien ships aren't just using quantum technology. They're dependent on quantum entanglement with their home system for basic operational functions." The implications were staggering. Every alien ship was essentially a terminal connected to a vast computational network spanning light years of space. Their superior technology came not from the vessels themselves, but from their connection to the accumulated knowledge and processing power of the entire hegemony. "That's why the communication disruption affected them so severely," Sarah continued, her mind racing through the possibilities. "We weren't just cutting off their ability to talk to each other. We were partially severing their connection to their civilization's entire technological base." This discovery led to humanity's most ambitious project yet. Using every quantum research facility on Earth, teams of physicists began developing what they called the Isolation Protocol, a coordinated quantum interference pattern designed to completely cut the alien ships off from their home network. The work was incredibly dangerous. Quantum entanglement experiments at this scale had never been attempted, and the energy requirements pushed Earth's power grids to their absolute limits. Several test runs resulted in massive blackouts across entire continents, and one attempt nearly triggered a quantum cascade that could have destabilized matter across half the planet. But humans had one advantage that Zarkoth continued to underestimate. Desperation breeds innovation at a speed that comfortable civilizations cannot match. Within 72 hours, humanity had accomplished quantum engineering advances that should have taken decades. The isolation protocol launched on the 10th day after the aliens' arrival, coordinated from secret facilities hidden deep underground to avoid alien detection. Every particle accelerator, quantum computer, and experimental physics laboratory on Earth fired simultaneously, creating an interference pattern that stretched across the entire solar system. The effect on the alien fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Cut off from their home network, the ship's advanced systems began failing in cascade patterns. Artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Life support systems struggled to maintain atmospheric pressure, and the vessel's seemingly effortless flight became increasingly erratic. But most importantly, the aliens inside began to panic. Intercepted communications revealed crews that had never experienced system failures, never fought without technological superiority, and never been cut off from the certainty that their empire's vast resources were just a quantum transmission away. Zarkoth's response was a transmission filled with raw fury and something approaching desperation. Impossible. No primitive species should possess quantum isolation capabilities. His voice crackled across the disrupted communication channels. You cannot sever our connection to the hegemony. We are eternal. We are inevitable. But the alien ruler's protests couldn't change the reality that his fleet was now operating on backup systems and emergency protocols. Their technological advantage reduced to whatever equipment they actually carried aboard their ships. The vessels that had seemed like instruments of divine wrath were now revealed to be sophisticated, but ultimately limited machines, operated by crews who had never learned to fight without overwhelming superiority. Dr. Chen watched the alien ships struggle to maintain formation and felt something she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Genuine hope. They're not gods, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the command center with perfect clarity. They're just bullies with better toys, and we just took their toys away. The final phase of the battle for Earth was about to begin, and for the first time since the massive ships had appeared in Earth's skies, humanity held the advantage. The question now was whether they could press that advantage before Zarkoth found some new way to threaten the world. Unknown to the humans celebrating their success, the alien ruler was indeed preparing one final, desperate gambit that would either secure his victory or destroy everything he had hoped to conquer. Zarkoth's final gambit began with a transmission unlike any the aliens had sent before. Instead of his usual arrogant pronouncements, the alien ruler's voice carried the cold fury of someone who had been pushed beyond all reasonable limits. "Creatures of Earth," he began, his image appearing on every screen across the planet despite the quantum interference still disrupting his communications. "You have proven more troublesome than any species in the history of the hegemony. Your tricks and deceptions end now." The alien ruler gestured, and his ship's cameras revealed something that made every human observer's blood run cold. The interior of Zarkoth's vessel had been transformed into what could only be described as a weapon. Massive energy conduits ran along every surface, all leading to a central chamber where swirling patterns of light suggested forces that no human technology could comprehend. "I am activating the World Killer Protocol," Zarkoth continued, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "This device will destabilize your planet's core, causing it to collapse into stellar matter. Your world will become a brief star, burning away all trace of your miserable existence. The hegemony loses a potential colony, but the galaxy gains a lesson in the price of defying us." Dr. Chen stared at the readings her instruments were collecting from the alien flagship, her face pale with the realization of what they were facing. "The energy patterns are unlike anything we've seen," she reported to the Emergency Council. "If he's telling the truth about destabilizing the planet's core, we have maybe 6 hours before the process becomes irreversible. How do we stop it?" President Martinez asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "We don't stop it," Sarah replied, her mind already working through possibilities that seemed impossible. "We stop him. The device requires constant management and adjustment. Take out Zarkoth, and the process should collapse before it can reach critical mass." General Hayes leaned forward intently. "Are you suggesting we board an alien spacecraft and capture their ruler while he's in the middle of destroying our planet?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Sarah said with a certainty that surprised even herself. "Look at the tactical situation. His ship is stationary, focusing all its energy on the world killer device. His fleet is scattered and operating on backup systems, and most importantly, he's so focused on his final weapon that he's not paying attention to conventional threats. What followed was the most audacious military operation in human history. Within 2 hours, every Special Forces unit on Earth had been mobilized and equipped with hastily developed anti-gravity devices reverse-engineered from alien technology salvaged from the destroyed Moscow ship. The plan was insane by any rational standard. Modified fighter aircraft would approach Zarkoth's ship at maximum speed, using quantum interference patterns to mask their approach. When they reached the vessel's hull, Special Forces teams would use shaped charges to breach the alien ship's armor and storm the interior, fighting their way to Zarkoth's command center. "This is suicide," Colonel Maria Santos observed as she checked her team's equipment one final time. The former graduate student had volunteered for the mission, her knowledge of alien communication protocols making her invaluable for the assault. "Maybe," replied Captain Jack Morrison, the American Navy SEAL leading the primary assault team, "but it's better than letting that alien bastard turn our planet into a barbecue." The approach began at dawn on the 11th day, with 6 modified F-22 fighters screaming toward Zarkoth's ship at speeds that pushed both aircraft and pilots to their absolute limits. The quantum interference generators mounted on each aircraft created sensor shadows that made them nearly invisible to alien detection systems. The alien flagship, massive and imposing as it focused on charging its planet-killing weapon, never saw them coming. The first breach charge detonated against the ship's hull exactly as planned, creating an opening large enough for the assault teams to enter. What they found inside defied every expectation about alien architecture. Instead of sterile corridors and advanced technology, the ship's interior was almost organic, with walls that seemed to pulse with living energy and passages that curved in ways that hurt human eyes to follow. "This place feels wrong," whispered Sergeant Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, as his team advanced through corridors that seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at them. "It's like the ship is alive." The alien crew, caught completely, off guard by the boarding action, responded with weapons that fired beams of coherent light and force fields that could crush a human body instantly, but they had never fought enemies in close combat, never faced opponents who used cover and tactical coordination instead of relying on technological superiority. Human special forces, trained in every form of warfare their species had devised, proved devastatingly effective in the cramped confines of the alien ship. Years of fighting insurgents and terrorists had taught them to adapt to any environment, to turn any space into a battlefield, and to keep fighting even when massively outgunned. The running battle through the alien ship lasted nearly an hour, with human teams advancing steadily toward the central command chamber, despite taking casualties from weapons they barely understood. The aliens fought desperately, but their tactics were those of a species that had never faced serious resistance. Captain Morrison's team reached Zarkoth's command center just as the alien ruler was making final adjustments to his planet-killing device. The massive chamber was dominated by the crystalline throne Sarah's team had seen in the broadcasts, but now the throne was connected to energy conduits that pulsed with power that made the air itself crackle. Zarkoth turned to face the human intruders, his silver-skinned features twisted with fury and disbelief. "Impossible creatures! How dare you defile the sacred command chamber of the hegemony?" "Your world-killer device," Colonel Santos called out, her weapon trained on the alien ruler, even as energy patterns swirled around them. "Shut it down now, or we'll shut you down permanently." The alien ruler's response was to gesture toward control surfaces that responded to his thoughts, attempting to accelerate the planet-killing process. But he had made a critical mistake. In his arrogance and fury, Zarkoth had failed to consider that humans might actually be willing to risk everything to stop him. Captain Morrison didn't hesitate. His shot took the alien ruler in the shoulder, spinning him away from the controls and sending him crashing to the deck of his own command chamber. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was enough to break Zarkoth's concentration and disrupt his connection to the ship's systems. The effect was immediate. Without the alien ruler's direct control, the world-killer device began to destabilize, its energy patterns fluctuating wildly as safety protocols engaged. Warning lights flashed throughout the chamber as the ship's automated system struggled to prevent a catastrophic overload. "The device is shutting down," Santos reported, monitoring readings on equipment her team had brought from Earth. "But we need to get out of here before the whole thing explodes." But Captain Morrison was staring at the wounded alien ruler with an expression that made even his hardened teammates nervous. "No," he said quietly. "We're not leaving without him." What happened next would become legend among human military forces. Despite the ship shaking apart around them, despite alien security forces closing in on their position, and despite having accomplished their primary mission, the human assault team made the decision to capture Zarkoth himself. The alien ruler, wounded and disoriented, found himself dragged from his crystalline throne by creatures he had dismissed as primitive savages. His protests and threats were ignored as human soldiers applied restraints designed for the most dangerous prisoners on Earth. "This is impossible," Zarkoth raged as he was hauled toward the breach in his ship's hull. "The hegemony does not surrender. Rulers of the Empire do not become prisoners to inferior species." "Guess there's a first time for everything," Morrison replied as his team prepared to evacuate the dying alien ship. The escape from Zarkoth's flagship was almost as dangerous as the boarding action had been. With their ruler captured and their primary weapon destroyed, the remaining alien crew fought with desperate fury to prevent the humans from leaving with their prize. Energy weapons carved through the ship's corridors, and several sections of the vessel simply disintegrated as overloaded systems failed catastrophically. But human determination, fueled by the knowledge that they had saved their world and captured the being who had threatened to destroy it, proved unstoppable. The assault teams fought their way back to their entry point, carrying their wounded comrades and their alien prisoner through a ship that was literally coming apart around them. The sight of human aircraft emerging from the collapsing alien flagship, carrying the captured ruler of the hegemony, was broadcast live across every communication network on Earth. The psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. Humanity had not only defeated the aliens, they had captured their king. As Zarkoth was transferred to the most secure facility on Earth, his remaining fleet made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Without their leader and facing an enemy that had proven far more dangerous than anyone had imagined, the surviving alien ships. The decision to parade Zarkoth through the streets of Earth's major cities was not made by any government or military leader. It emerged spontaneously from humanity's collective need to see their former tormentor brought low, to witness with their own eyes that the being who had threatened to exterminate their species was now powerless and defeated. The first parade began in New York City, where Zarkoth had first appeared to deliver his ultimatum. The alien ruler, stripped of his crystalline armor and bound in restraints designed for the most dangerous criminals on Earth, was transported through the streets in an open military vehicle that moved slowly enough for everyone to see. Millions of people lined the parade route, their faces showing a mixture of triumph, relief, and fascination. Many had lost friends and family to the alien attacks. Others had spent days expecting to die when the 7-day deadline expired. Now they watched their former executioner reduced to a prisoner of war, his silver skin pale and his elongated features twisted with rage and humiliation. "Look at him," Sarah Chen observed from her position in the reviewing stand, watching as Zarkoth struggled futilely against his restraints. "Just another bully who forgot that there's always someone stronger." The alien ruler's attempts to maintain his dignity were futile. The being who had commanded a fleet of planet killers and spoken of the inevitable triumph of the hegemony now sat helpless as human children threw confetti at his transport vehicle. Street vendors sold alien-themed snacks, musicians played victory songs, and artists painted murals celebrating humanity's impossible victory. But the parade in New York was just the beginning. Word of Zarkoth's capture had spread across the globe within hours, and every major city demanded the opportunity to see the defeated alien ruler for themselves. The logistics were complex, but humanity had just accomplished the impossible feat of defeating an interstellar empire. Moving one prisoner around the world was almost trivial by comparison. In London, where the alien bombardment had come closest to hitting the city, the crowd's reaction was particularly intense. British Reserve gave way to uncharacteristic celebration as Zarkoth's transport moved down the Thames, escorted by Royal Navy vessels that had participated in the final battle. Big Ben chimed victory as the alien ruler passed beneath its shadow, bound and powerless. The scene in Tokyo was even more remarkable. The Japanese people, known for their politeness and restraint, lined the streets in absolute silence as Zarkoth's vehicle passed. The quiet was more unsettling than the loudest cheers, a collective statement that spoke of judgment passed and justice served. Cherry blossoms, out of season but encouraged by artificial means, fell like snow around the defeated alien ruler. Moscow's parade was perhaps the most poetic, taking place in Red Square, where so many other conquered enemies had been displayed throughout Russian history. The alien ruler who had destroyed their city's hovering ship now sat in chains, while Soviet-era military music played and veterans of Earth's defense saluted the vehicle carrying their former tormentor. But it was in smaller cities and towns around the world that the parades became truly meaningful. In places where people had huddled in shelters waiting for death, where families had said goodbye to each other expecting the world to end, the sight of Zarkoth in chains became proof that their survival was real. Children who had been too young to fully understand the crisis drew pictures of the defeated alien. Elderly people who had lived through every catastrophe of the modern era wept openly as they realized they had witnessed humanity's greatest victory. Veterans of Earth's defense found themselves treated like heroes wherever they appeared, their uniforms a symbol of the species that had refused to surrender. The psychological impact on the remaining alien forces was devastating. Intercepted communications revealed ships in full retreat toward deep space, their crews demoralized beyond recovery. Several vessels had suffered mutinies as crews refused to continue fighting an enemy that had captured their emperor. At least 2 ships had been abandoned entirely, their crews taking escape pods toward uninhabited systems rather than face the possibility of joining their ruler in human captivity. "They're scattered," General Hayes reported during the victory briefing, his voice carrying satisfaction that had been absent for weeks. Long-range tracking shows the surviving ships fleeing in different directions. Their fleet cohesion is completely broken. President Martinez nodded, studying intelligence reports that painted a picture of total alien collapse. "What about reinforcements?" Zarkoth mentioned calling for help. "Our quantum monitoring systems are detecting no incoming vessels," Dr. Chen replied. "Either the hegemony is unwilling to risk more ships against us, or our communication disruption was more effective than we realized. It's possible they don't even know what happened here." The implications were staggering. Humanity had not only survived first contact with a hostile alien empire, but had inflicted such a decisive defeat that the aliens were retreating across multiple star systems. The species that had been scheduled for extinction was now the dominant military power in their local region of space. But perhaps the most significant moment came during Zarkoth's final parade. Through the streets of Geneva, where the leaders of Earth had gathered to witness their victory, the alien ruler, who had endured days of public humiliation with stubborn pride, finally broke as he saw the representatives of every human nation standing together in unified triumph. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the silence that had fallen over the crowd. "Primitive species do not defeat the hegemony. Inferior civilizations do not capture the rulers of superior empires. This cannot be happening." Dr. Chen, standing close enough to hear the alien ruler's words, felt compelled to respond. "You made the same mistake every conqueror makes," she said quietly. "You assumed that being stronger meant being smarter. You forgot that desperation breeds innovation faster than comfort ever could." Zarkoth turned to stare at her with eyes that held the first genuine understanding he had shown since his capture. "You were not supposed to be able to adapt so quickly. No species develops quantum isolation technology in mere days. No primitive civilization should possess the tactical flexibility to defeat superior forces." "That's where you went wrong," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had helped save the world. "You kept calling us primitive, but you never bothered to understand what that actually meant. We've been fighting for survival since we first stood upright. Every predator, every disease, every natural disaster has been trying to kill us for millions of years. We got very good at not dying." The alien ruler's expression shifted, showing what might have been the first genuine emotion he had displayed since his capture. Fear, not of death or pain, but of understanding. "Your species, you were forged by constant conflict. Every generation that survived became more dangerous than the last. And you gave us something we'd never had before, Sarah added with a smile that held no warmth. A common enemy. Every human on Earth working together, focused on a single goal. You didn't just threaten our cities or our governments. You threatened our children, our future, our right to exist. That was your real mistake. The parade continued through Geneva's streets, but the conversation had been heard by the recording devices that followed every moment of Zarkoth's captivity. Within hours, the alien ruler's words were being broadcast across the galaxy by human transmitters that had been modified to use the alien's own communication frequencies. The message was simple and devastatingly effective. The hegemony, the supposedly unstoppable force that had conquered 47 worlds, had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Their emperor was a prisoner, their fleet was scattered, and their reputation for invincibility was shattered forever. As the parades finally ended and Zarkoth was transferred to a secure facility for what would undoubtedly be a very long interrogation, humanity began to truly comprehend what they had accomplished. The species that had been scheduled for extinction was now the possessor of alien technology. Alien intelligence and, most importantly, alien respect. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. In the weeks that followed, as Earth scientists reverse-engineered alien technology and diplomats established contact with other species who had heard of the hegemony's defeat, one fact became increasingly clear. Humanity had not just won a war. They had announced their arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. The primitives of Earth had dragged an alien emperor through their streets, and the galaxy was watching.